Hello. Okay. So, hello everyone. Hello. Welcome to the Web Study Jam organized by GDS CPIT. My name is Shayur Bhattacharya, and today I'm going to take the session on Intro to Web Dev with Angular. I hope I am audible. Just a minute. Okay. So to begin with the session, I'll just go over how the session will be, and it basically will be divided into two parts. The first part of the session will be based on HTML, CSS, and that will be a quick part where I'll just give you the basics of HTML, CSS, and then go to Angular. Now, in the second part, I'll be talking about Angular, brief description of all the main parts of Angular, and then I'll start with the coding section, in which I'll make a quick uh, application, like a to-do list with Angular. Okay, so let's just start with what to expect from this session. The session will be an introduction to web development, and it's going to be basic. So it's not a very intermediate or advanced session. There is no requirement of a prior knowledge of web development, but it's always good to have a little bit of understanding of web and how it works. Uh, Also, we'll be doing Angular, which requires TypeScript. If you have some knowledge of TypeScript, that's also good. If you don't, then also it's fine. You can also, follow along and learn on the way. The session will include hands-on coding, so get your editors ready, and this will focus on only the technologies and the basic concepts and not go in depth with each concept such. Okay. So let's just start with the first thing, which is, of course, HTML, CSS. So let's just talk about what HTML is. It's a markup language. It's not a programming language. That's what many people mistake it as. So what is a markup language? Basically, a markup language basically describes the structure of some data. Now, HTML specifically is a markup language which describes the structure of a web page. Its job is to place things in order rather than position them. So it places things in order, which means that if you write a heading and then you write a paragraph, it places them exactly in that same order, but it does not give any styling or any positioning to those elements on its own. That's why we sometimes use something called CSS with it so that we can style these elements separately. Okay. So we go to the next slide, which is CSS. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to learn about is CSS. CSS is the style part of the HTML. So HTML is basically only text, and CSS is basically gives the colors and the positioning and the sizes to all of the elements. It's a style sheet language, which basically describes the presentation of a document. It basically sets some rules for a specific element, and according to those rules, the elements are styled on the web page. Okay. So now we'll start with HTML tags, which are the basics of HTML, the building blocks of an HTML document. Everything that you see on a web page, from images to input fields to paragraphs to headings, everything is a tag in HTML. And the syntax of an HTML tag is you give a less than symbol, then you give the name of the HTML tag, and then you give the greater than symbol, which is the syntax of a tag. Now, there are different kinds of tags. There are basically two kinds of tags, a paired tag and an unpaired tag. Now, what a paired tag is, it's basically just like a paragraph is a paired tag. what it means is that it has an opening tag, which is basically angle brackets P and then closing brackets. Uh, and you have a closing paragraph tag, which is angle brackets, then a slash, and then P, and then another angle brackets. In between these two tags is what we place is the context of that tag. What it means is that whatever's in between these two tags, we are going to treat them as a paragraph. Now, there are 142 HTML tags according to Mozilla Developer Network documentation. We only have to learn about a couple of them, not all of them, because it's not possible. Okay. So the first two tags that I'm going to talk about is head and body tag. These are the most important tags in HTML. So what happens is that the head tag contains a metadata or a description about the web page. It is basically some data that is supposed to be consumed by browsers and web crawlers, not by the users. It's basically description, like the title of the web page, some description of the web page, some meta data, or some links to style sheets and scripts. All of this is put into the head section of the HTML document. The user doesn't see the head sec whatever data we write in the head section, but they see the body section. So whatever content you want on the web page, you have to apply it on inside the body section of the HTML document. Okay, going on to the next tag is we're going to talk about heading tags. Now, as you can see on the right, we have an example of an HTML document. Just now we talked about the body tag. As you can see, we have a body tag, an opening body tag, and here at the end, we have a closing body tag, and that wraps the entire web document or the web page, whatever content we require on the page. As you can see, you have different tags here. All of them have the same style, which is H1, H2, H3, H4, up to H6. These are all headings in the order of decreasing hierarchy and size. So the heading one, which is H1, is the biggest heading of the largest font size and font weight. H2 is smaller than that, H3 is smaller than that. And when a web crawler reads the page, they also read it as a hierarchy. So, which means that if you have a H1 and under that you have an H2, then the web crawler will uh, treat it like a subtitle for the H1. Okay. So after a heading, we'll learn about a paragraph. Okay. So what a paragraph tag is basically it just says that we're going to add some paragraph to the web page, and its styling is going to be a little different from the heading tag. The heading tags are normally bold and of a bigger font, but the paragraph tags are much smaller and they look like a proper paragraph. Okay. So same way as we wrote our H1 tags, we have started a P tag. We've given some, lorem ipsum, which is basically a placeholder text. And we have ended the P tag just like we talked about, angle bracket slash P and then angle brackets. Okay. So the next tag that we're going to talk about is the anchor tag. Now, with this anchor tag, you're also introduced to a new concept, which is the attribute. Now, in this case, as you can see, you have an anchor tag or an A tag. You've opened the opening tag, and after that, you have not closed it, but given a value to a variable like href. Now, what this is basically it's an attribute. Href is an attribute which basically gives an extra information to the anchor tag that the link is going to redirect to the URL provided in the href attribute. So just like this, you can have multiple attributes to your elements, and these are basically extra information to the element. In this case, it's the URL to the link. Okay. Next is the input tag. Now, to take input from the user, you'll have to use things like text fields, password fields, date inputs, radio buttons, checkboxes. All of that we can do with the input tag. Okay. So what the input tag does is basically creates an input element on the page, and we can set the type of the input element by setting an attribute, just like we set the href attribute on the anchor tag. We can set a type attribute on the input tag, and we can set its value to text for a text field, radio for a radio button, checkbox for a checkbox, and date for a date input, and so on. There are many other input tags, and we'll talk about them later. Yeah. Okay. Then we come to the division tag. Now, what division tag is, it does not uh, put an extra element on the web page, but it groups a number of elements together into one container. So we call it a container element, which is used to wrap a couple of elements together. And on the right, you can see an example of a div tag. We have created a div. Inside that, we have an h2 having the context, having the text. This is a heading in div element. And then we have a p tag, which has this is some text in a div element. And these two elements are wrapped inside a div. And when we style this, we basically used some CSS here already. If you don't understand, it's fine. We've basically given it a border, a background color of light blue, and a text in line of center. So if we style that, the style is applied to the entire division, not just the elements, but the entire division containing both the elements gets the same styling. So this is what div tag is. It's basically used to organize certain parts of your HTML document. Okay. So the next thing that we're going to learn about HTML is the class and the ID attributes. Now you've seen the attributes like href and type attribute on the input tag, but class and ID attributes are common to all HTML tags. You can add a class and ID to all the HTML tags. What happens with a class or ID is that it helps us to identify specific elements on the page. What's the difference between class and ID is that we can apply the same class to different elements and multiple elements at a time. But ID we can only apply to this to one element on a page. Why are they used? They're used to select elements so that we can style them. So if you have a class applied to a couple of elements and then you style that class in your CSS, that gets applied to all of the elements that have that class. Just like that, if you apply some styles to an ID, then all the element which has that ID specifically gets the style. So these attributes are used for styling and also for identifying elements. Okay. Now next, as we've already started talking about styling classes, let's get into styling the HTML with CSS. Okay. So there are a couple of ways to add CSS to your web page. Uh, and One of the ways is to create something called a style tag. Now you can put, just like you created a body tag, a head tag, a P tag, H1 tag, you have a style tag, which you can put in the head section of the web page. And inside the style tag, you can write a CSS code of any kind, which will basically give some styling to the web page. Now, how that happens is basically we select some elements and we give them some styles by setting some properties and their values. So on the next slide, I'll show you how the syntax of CSS is. In CSS, we use something called a selector to select different elements. We'll come to that a little later, but after that, you see there are curly braces, and then there are property value pairs, and you have a couple of lines of them. So what these property value pairs are basically the property is the name of the property. It can be a background color, the border, or anything. And the value is the value applied to that property for this specific element. Now you can have multiple blocks like this. What happens is whatever properties you define inside the curly braces, they get applied to whatever elements get selected by the selector that you apply. For an example, we have here a block in which we are selecting all the p tags from the web page. If you just write p, what happens is all the paragraph tags from a web page are selected at once, and they're given a background color of blue and a margin of 10 pixels. Okay. So let's go to the next slide, which is selecting by classes and IDs. Right now, we just saw how we can select, elements by the type of the element. So we write P, H1, and then we can open our curly braces and style those elements. But we can also use classes and IDs to style, as we already talked about. Now, how we do that is basically we use the dot symbol for classes and the hash symbol for ID. So what happens is in the CSS, if you write the symbol dot and then you give the name of the class, and then again inside curly braces you give some CSS rules. What happens is all the elements that have the same class that you specified here will get the same styles. Same with ID. If you give hash and then the name of the ID, the element with that ID will get the rule, the CSS applied to it. Okay, cool. So before we jump into Angular, I'll do some HTML, CSS coding, and that will make things much more clear to you. Till now, it was just me showing you some slides and examples, but let's just jump into code right now. So I have a folder open here. Just create a new folder, say basic HTML. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So inside this folder, we're gonna open Visual Studio Code. So I'm using Visual Studio Code for coding. You can use any editor of your choice. Just give it some time. Yep. Okay. So here I have my Visual Studio Code open. Let's just create a new file here and name it index.html. So it's a convention that we call our first HTML page index.html. When you make a website, your home page or the first HTML page, the main HTML page will always have the name of index.html. So you can name it anything at this point, but when you're making a whole project, you have to name it index.html. So inside the HTML file, as I told you, we will create the HTML tag, but before that, we have to add something. Just follow along. I'll add doc type HTML. So this line basically says that I'm going to use the HTML5 syntax. And then after that, we have to wrap everything inside the HTML tag. Okay, so everything inside an HTML document should go inside an HTML tag. And notice how this tag is also a paired tag. So it has an opening tag and a closing tag right here. Inside that, we will create the two things that we mentioned at first. We'll create a head tag and we'll create a body tag. Okay, so I just open my browser, just keep it ready because we have to preview our web page here. Okay, cool. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to preview this web page as I'm going to code in this HTML file. I'm going to see those changes appear on the browser and make changes according to that. So what I am doing is that I'm using an extension on VS Code called the live server extension. So if you go to the extensions panel and you type live server, you get the extension, this extension. I'm using this extension to actually run this HTML file. What you can also do is you can go to the folder which has this HTML file and right click on this and open with, and then select a browser from here. Okay, but right now I'm just using live server. Okay, so here I have the preview of this HTML page. Okay, so as you can see inside the body tag, if I just write h1 and I just write my name, I save, we see a big text on the web page having my name here. Okay, so that is basically how HTML works. We've just put an h1 tag inside the body tag, and that's what it is rendering on the page. Okay, so let me just tell you one thing about the head tag. So if you if you can see this tab up here in the on the taskbar for the browser, you'll see that the tab has a title. And you can actually change this title by adding a title tag to the head section and just giving it a name like my web app. If you save that, as you can see, my tab just changed its name from the URL to my web app. Okay. So this is what a head tag is used for. It basically gives some information to the browser, but whatever you see inside the web page is inside the body tag. Now, just after my name as a heading, I can add a p tag and I can say I am a web developer. Okay, and that appears as a paragraph tag on the web page. Okay, cool. Now, now I can have a couple of more p tags out here, and these p tags might be saying I love music. I love coding, and I love football. Cool. So now we have four paragraph tags with different text. And uh, now I decided that this is just a normal textual HTML page. I want to style it. So how do I do that? So I'll just like I said, I'll create a style tag inside the head section. And inside here, I'm going to start styling each of my components. Now, as I said, there are different ways of selecting the components that we're going to style. So the first way is to use the tag name. So I'm going to style the h1 tag. So I'm going to write h1, and after that, I'm going to open the curly braces. And inside the curly braces, I'll give, let's say, a background color of aqua. As you can see, you get an h1 tag with a background color of aqua. To change the color of the text, you can also write color and then give it a color of beige, which will change the color to beige. I don't think it's visible here. I'll just change the color to gray. And now you can see that, um, yeah, so my name is now in gray on an aqua background. Okay, just like that, if I want to style all the p tags, I can apply style to the p tag like this. I write p and then in curly braces, I give them a background color of black. And because they are not visible, because the color is black as well, so I'll just change that color to white. Okay. So now you can see that we have applied the same styles to all the p tags on the page. And that's what this p here determines. Okay, that's a selector for all the p tags. But what if I want to style the first two p tags a different way and the last two p tags a different way? So how I do that is basically I'm going to add a class to the p tag and just say first para. Now we can style this class by using the dot symbol and then writing first para. So that's the class that I want to style. And now I'm going to give them a font family of sans serif, which basically makes this sans serif. Why is it applied to the first one? Because we've only applied the class to the first one. Now, as you remember, class can be applied to multiple elements. So we can copy this and we can paste it inside this p tag as well. And you'll see that both of these p tags now become sans serif. Okay. Now, what if I want to specifically style the second p tag, which is I love music, to have a color of pink? What I can do is I can give an ID to this p tag and say, uh, let's say second para, or probably just give it name like pink text. And now to select all the to select the p tag with the ID, we write hash and then we write pink text. And then we open the curly braces. Inside the curly braces, I'm going to give it a color of pink. So as you can see, it applies the style to only the element with the ID. So this is it. This is the basic idea of how HTML and CSS work. Um, just a minute. Yeah. So okay. So we have basically talked about HTML, CSS, and how they work. That's about it with the introduction to HTML, CSS. Now we'll quickly jump into Angular because we have a lot to discuss in the Angular side. Okay. So we have to understand before starting coding in Angular, you have to understand what Angular actually is. So it is a component-based framework, which is mostly we write Angular applications in TypeScript and it is used to build scalable web applications. Now, what is a component-based framework? It's very important to understand that. So what components are is basically we take repetitive parts of your code and we make them as a component so that we reduce that repetitiveness and we can only reference the components wherever we need them and we don't have to write the same code over and over. So we modularize our application into components and we use those components wherever they're needed, not the entire code at once. It's also a collection of well-integrated libraries that covers a wide variety of features like routing, forms management, client-server communication, and more. So Angular, the Angular package has a lot of packages, a lot of libraries, which help with a lot of features for Angular. For example, the Angular CLI is a package. The Angular has a forms package. The Angular has a package for routing and etc. Okay. So the topics that we're going to cover in this in the following slides are these. We're going to talk about the Angular CLI, the project structure, the directives, templates, and data binding. So what I'll do is I'll basically go through the Angular CLI and the project structure, and then I'll quickly create an Angular application and show you some basics of how Angular works and all the files and folders that are there in an Angular project. And then we're going to go over these slides one by one. And after that, we're gonna get into coding in Angular and actually creating an application. Okay. So let's start with the Angular CLI. Now, what the Angular CLI is basically it's a command line interface, which means that it's a set of commands that you run on the terminal, which helps you create, manage Angular applications. Okay, so CLI is basically it runs on the terminal, and you have to install it from npm. I'll tell you how to install Angular CLI, and we'll go over the creating a new application and all that. So what it does is it basically provides commands to create application, create components, services, building applications, and deploying them. If you want to know more about the Angular CLI, you can go to this URL right here, and that's basically the documentation for the entire CLI. You'll get to learn about a lot of commands. Okay. So let's just get into the Angular CLI and let's just create a Angular application uh, right here. Okay, I'll just close this browser right here, get into the file. Okay. Okay, so inside this folder, I'm going to open my terminal because the Angular CLI is a command line interface. We have to use the terminal. Um, Okay, so there are a few things that you need to have installed to actually install Angular CLI and start working with it. The two things that you need are Node and npm. So now to check if you have Node and npm, what you do is you go to your terminal and type in node dash dash version. Then you press enter. So this will give you a version number, and if that comes, it basically means that your computer has Node.js installed on it. And then you can also check if you have npm installed on it. So you can write npm dash dash version, which will give you a version number again, and which is not going to be equal to the Node version. They are separate, but it will also give you a version. It will not give any error. If it is giving some error, that means that Node is not installed properly or it is not installed at all on your PC. What you can do is you can go to your browser and you can type in Node.js. Okay. So open this website and you can download Node.js from here. You click on this button and you get a Node.js installer, which you then open to install Node.js. Okay. Now, once you have Node.js installed and the Node.js Node dash dash version gives you a version number, you can install the Angular CLI now. So to install the Angular CLI, you have to write this command. You have to write npm, and then you can write install. Then you give the global flag, which is dash G, and then you write at Angular slash CLI. Okay. So this is the package that you want to install. And this dash G flag basically says that you want to install it globally on your PC, not just for the project on this folder. Okay. So it's going to globally install the Angular CLI. And after you've done that, I already have it, so I'm not going to do it right now. So you press enter and it installs the Angular CLI. You can now check if the Angular CLI is installed properly by writing ng help, and that should give you a list of these commands. Okay. So there are all these commands that you can use in with the Angular CLI. We're not going to get into all of the commands, but we're going to get into some of them, like the ng new command to create a new Angular application, the ng serve command to actually serve that application on a port on your PC so that you can preview your changes. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clear my terminal. And now I'm going to create a new Angular application. So to create a new Angular application, you write ng new, and then you give it some name like my app. Okay, I'm gonna give it this name, and then I'm gonna press enter. Once I do that, I will be asked if I want Angular routing, which I don't, and it's going to ask what type of a style sheet format I'm going to use, which in which I'm going to say CSS because I'm not familiar with the other style sheet formats. You can go ahead and choose any style sheet format of your choice. Um, yeah, so now what it does, it basically installs all the npm packages, everything that is required to run your application, and it's going to set everything up for you. Okay, so we'll wait for that. Okay. Yeah, so we have created the Angular application. Now to see your Angular application, you can go back to the folder and you see here we have created a folder called My App. That's the name of the application. Once you open that, you see there are a lot of folders and files that are there on the inside the folder. So I'm going to open this folder with uh, Visual Studio Code. Yeah. So as you can see, the Visual Studio Code has opened. I'm going to close the previous one. Okay. Yeah. So now let me open. Okay. So for now, don't get intimidated by all these folders and files that you see in the application. All these files are not really, you don't require to know all of these files. But I'll tell you about a couple of files which you need to know about. The first one is package.json. So I'll start off with package.json. This is basically a description of the application itself. So it gives you the name of the application, the version of the application. It gives you the scripts that you can run on the application folder, and it also has something called dependencies. Now this is where we basically define all the packages that our application requires for it to run. Okay, and we also give the version numbers for them. So why do we write these dependencies? Is because all these dependencies, when they're installed, it becomes a very big bundle, and transferring that bundle from one computer to the other is very tedious. So what we do is we just write the names of the packages and their versions, and then later on some other PC, we can just install all these packages from here. Okay. So this is about package.json. Now, the next file that we're going to see will be inside the src folder uh, named index.html. Now, as I said, in an full-fledged application, you will have to name the first uh, HTML page, the main HTML page as index.html, and that's what we've named it here. As you can see, we have the doc type here as well. We have the HTML tag with an attribute of lang, which is basically saying that it's the language of the page. Uh, then we have something called the head tag. Just like we saw, we have the title tag having a title, and we have a couple of more metadata, links, etc. Okay. We're not gonna worry about the head tag much, but we're gonna go into the body tag. Now this is the part where we render stuff on the page, right? So the user sees this part. Now here we have put something called the app root tag. Now this might not make sense to you because app root is not a tag that we learned about, right? It's because it's not really an HTML tag, but it's an Angular component. So this is how Angular is different from other HTML from HTML is that it adds its own functionality and it adds some more tags over the HTML tags which are basically the components of the Angular. So here, the app root component is basically the root component, the main component of the application. Okay, so where this application comes from is basically this folder here, right here, app folder. Okay, so inside the application folder, the app folder, we have five files over here. Okay. So these are the files that we define so that we can use this component in the index.html, just like this. Now we'll get into those files and we'll talk about each one of them. Uh, the one file that you can ignore and you can actually delete from here is this app.component.spec.ts file. This file is mostly used for testing, and you don't require testing at this moment, so you can actually delete that. So if you go to the app folder, you'll see there are four files. Uh, so I'll talk about each file one by one. The app.component.html file is the file where you define the template or the HTML for that component. So right now, this HTML file has a lot of code written. This is basically Angular's boilerplate code. You don't have to worry about this. You can actually select all of that and delete. Okay. So what this app.component.html file does is that it creates a template for Angular to, start rendering stuff. And where it renders from, what data it renders, that comes from the component file, which is the app.component.ts file. That's a TypeScript file, which basically has a class with a decorator of a component. And as you can see, a cool thing is that here you see a property called the selector, okay? And you have the value of app root. Now this app root is the same selector that you used in your index.html uh, to select or to reference this component, the app component. Okay, so the named app root comes from this property of the component. Okay, then we have the template URL, which basically says that the template lies in the file app.component.html, and the style URLs from app.component.css. So what happens is that Angular has two things. One is a component, and the other is the template. Okay, so the component is where we define all the variables, the changing bits of data, which are the variables, and the template is basically a place where Angular, we define how Angular should render that data. So we define all the logic behind how data changes and what variables do we define, all of that inside this class, inside this app.component.ts file, and how we render that component, how we render those variables comes from the app.component.html file, which is the template for this file. Now, for an example, I'll just go to the app.component.ts. I'll get rid of this variable that is declared. So inside the class app component, I'm going to declare a new variable called the name variable. I'm going to give it a value of my name. Now inside the app.component.html file, what we can do is if we want to get the data from this component and print it on the HTML document, what we can do is we can just write h1 just like normal HTML. But here's where Angular is different from HTML. Here we can use something called text interpolation, which we're going to see in the slides a little later. But here we can actually give two curly braces, and within those curly braces, we can actually write the name of the variable. And now what happens is that this references the variable from this app component file, and this should show me my name as an h1 tag. Now, at this moment, I don't have the preview open, but to open the preview, what I can do is I can go to the terminal and I can write ng and then write serve and then dash dash open. Okay. This will basically run our application on a port on our PC, which is basically 4200. So it will run our application on localhost 4200 and it will open the browser on that page for us. Okay. So it's building our application now, and any moment it will show us the browser with our application running on it. Yeah, so as you can see, we have a application running on the localhost 4200, and uh, we have my name printed on the page. So as you can see, this syntax is not really HTML syntax, but this is Angular's text interpolation syntax, which basically binds the data from component to the template, that is the HTML. Okay, cool. Okay, so now we'll just continue with the PPT a little, and we'll see what we have next. Okay, so we have the template slide. Okay, so this slide basically talks about the templates that we just saw. Uh, Templates are basically just the HTML document inside the Angular application, which basically tells Angular what to render and where to render the data. Okay, and the template is not really HTML, but the syntax is extended by Angular and with some additional features. Just like we saw, we can use text interpolation, and after this, we're going to see many more features like this, which are not really HTML, but Angular's extended versions of HTML. Okay, okay. So let's just get into our let's just get into the application and let's just do a couple of more things. Okay. So let's say I want to create a variable like a counter. Okay. So I create a counter variable, which we set to 0 at first. We just set it to 0. Now we should be able to access the counter here as well. So we can just write p, or we can actually write h2. And inside, again, inside the same syntax of text interpolation, we can write counter. And that should show us a counter, right? So if we go to the page, as you can see, we have the page with my name and the counter value stored right here. Okay. So what Angular does is that it, as I said, it binds the data from the component.ts to the component.html. So it basically says that whenever the counter changes in real time, it will re-render this component to show the new value of the counter. So to see that in action, what we can do is we can create two buttons. You can just name them increment and another button, you can name them decrement. So these buttons, what it should do is it basically should increment the value of the counter and decrement the value of the counter on click. Okay, on whenever they click. So I'll just write a text here. I'll just say it's counter so that it's visible. Much more visible now. Okay, so what happens is when we click on the increment button, it should increase the counter by 1. And when we press the decrement button, it should decrease the counter by 1. Okay. So again, how that works is you have to do something called an event binding. So what an event binding is basically the opposite of text interpolation. Just like text interpolation says that there is some data on the component and we want to transfer that data to the template, just like here, the component, the counter is defined in the component, and we are basically referencing that or transferring the data from the component to the template. But here we are event binding, which means that the event occurs on the HTML, so on the web page, and we are going to relay that information to the component back. So it's the opposite way of communication, which is event binding. So it's the opposite way of communication. So it goes from template to the component. Okay. So how we apply event binding is we use the round brackets and we write the name of the event that we want to handle. So we want to handle the click event, and inside quotes we give a name of a function that we want to call. Okay, so we want to call the function handle increment, and we give the braces just like that to call the function. Okay, this is the syntax of event binding, and what this says is basically whenever the increment button is clicked, we want to call the handle increment function. But this handle increment function is not defined in the component. So we're just going to go to the component quickly. And inside the class, we're going to define a function. How this is how we define a function. We write the name of the function, and then we give round brackets, and then we give curly braces. Inside this, we give the definition of the function. So now this function, what it should do is it should increase the counter by one. So easy. Now we can just write this dot counter. So whenever you reference a an instance variable, you use this keyword. And then after that, we can just write plus plus, which is in JavaScript, in TypeScript, plus plus means an increment operator and basically increments the value of count. Now, if I click on the increment button, the counter should increment. So let's just check. Let's just click on the increment button. And as you can see, the counter actually increments. And you can keep doing that, and the counter will keep incrementing. Okay. Similarly, we can create a similar event binding for the decrement button, just like that. We can right click handle, and in place of de increment, we'll write decrement and we'll get the function parentheses. And now we have to define this function in the component file. Okay. Go to decrement. Inside this, just like we did for the increment, we can do a minus minus to decrement this value. Okay. So that's it. Now, if I press increment, it increases the value. If I press on decrement, it decreases the value. Okay. Uh, okay. So let's just go back the uh, to the slides and just get into something called the data binding. Okay. So we'll talk about data binding. We already saw two kinds of data binding. We already saw text interpolation. We already saw event binding. So what is data binding? As I told you, data binding is a process of communicating between the component and the template. Whenever something changes in the component side, we want to relay that information to the template. That's when we use text interpolation, property binding, or two-way binding. And whenever something happens on the template side and we want that information to come to the component, we use something like the event binding. Okay, so that's the opposite way. So the next thing that we're going to learn is uh, directives. Okay, so directives are basically Angular code or Angular syntaxes that transform things on the DOM. An example can be if you have a list of items and you want to print the same kind of item, but you have to map through a list of items and display all of them with in the same way. What you can use is you can use a structural directive like ng for. Let's say you want to, you know, conditionally render some element. For that, you can use ngIf and you can give a condition, and the element will only render uh, if that condition matches. Okay, so these are basically directives that transforms the DOM in some way. Even a component is also a directive because it also technically transforms the DOM. And but components are very integral to the Angular, the Angular system. So they're not called directives, but under the hood, components are also directives. But here we are specifically going to learn two kinds of directives, the structural directives and the attribute directives. You don't have to go into this demarcation, but there are three directives that we're going to focus mostly on. That is ngIf, ngFor, and ngModel. These three directives we're going to get into depth with. Not get into depth, but we will talk about them. But ngSwitch, ngClass, ngStyle will not get into. Okay, you can, of course, if you want, go to the documentation, learn about these directives as well. But we'll only learn about the three. So let's just go back to our application right here. Just open the preview as well. Um, yeah. So right here, let's just get rid of all the code that we wrote right here. And in the component as well, we're just gonna get rid of. Cool. Now, let's say I have inside the component, I have a variable animals, and this is an array of some animals. Like I can say cat, dog, monkey. So now we have a list of animals, and let's say we just want to display all these animals. Okay. Uh, What we can do is, of course, we can go to the HTML file and just like we did for text interpolation, if you know a little bit of JavaScript and if you know about arrays, you know that if you want to show all of these array items and there are only three array items, we can actually do this. We can write p uh, and then inside the curly braces, we can write animals and then we inside the index inside the square brackets we can give 0 and that will basically reference the first object in the array. I'm going to change this to h1 so that you can see properly. So yeah, so as you can see we have the first element displayed. Now we can just copy this we can just copy this line two more times and we can just change this index to 1 and 2. And now you see that we have the array displayed on the page, all the elements of the array displayed on the page. But what if this array had a lot of elements and you really cannot go and write all of those lines on yourself, right? So that's where Angular comes in and it helps you with a directive called the ngFor directive. Now, ngFor is used when you want to repeat an element for all the elements in an array or a list. Okay. If you want to iterate over all the elements in an array and you want to create an element in the DOM for each element in the array, then you need the ngFor directive. So how you write an ngFor directive is that first of all, you write the tag that you want to repeat. Inside the tag, just like an attribute, we will add the directive. We'll add the asterisk sign. We'll write ng, and with a capital F, we'll write for. Then we'll give an equal sign, and we'll write inside the quotes. We'll write this code: let animal of animals. So now what it does is basically repeats this element for as many animals there are inside the list. And it also creates a new variable and makes that accessible inside the h1 tag. So now you can, inside the h1 tag, create the text interpolation syntax. Inside that, we can actually write animal. And now, guess what? We have the entire list printed over here. With just one line, we can actually print thousands of lines of text on the web page if we have that many elements in the array. So just like if we add uh, a new animal like uh, kangaroo and save that, we'll see that the kangaroo appears in the list. We do not have to change anything on the HTML side. Okay, cool. Um, yeah, so that basically explains how ng for works. Now, let me tell you how ngIf works. Okay, just get rid of this as well. And in the HTML, we'll just get rid of that. Yeah, so in the component, let's say this time I have my name again. Okay. I have my name, if I can type. Yeah, so I have my name here, and inside the HTML tag, just like normal, I am uh, displaying my name. So I am using the text interpolation syntax to access the name and display it in the heading tag. Okay, so as you can see, you have my name here. Now, what if I have another variable called the show name variable? And this is a Boolean which is set to false. Okay. What it means or what it should do is that if show name is false, then the name should be hidden. And if it is true, the name should show. To do such a thing in Angular, you'll have to use a directive called the ng if directive. Okay. So let's just go into HTML, the template, and we'll start writing the ng if directive. So what we can do is, just like we wrote the ng for directive, we can write the ng if for the element that we want to conditionally render. We give a asterisk sign. We give the ng if symbol. After that, we give an equals, and then inside the quotes, we give the condition for the if. So we write show name triple equals true. Yep. So now my name just disappeared. The reason behind that is that show name is false at first. So that means that if I change this to true, now my name again appears. Okay. So let's just use the knowledge that we got from the previous examples and just create a toggle button for this show name. What I want is I want a button called toggle. What it should do is when we click on the toggle button, it should hide my name if it's showing, and it should show my name if it's hidden. So basically, how we'll do that is we'll basically change the value of show name to false if it's true and true if it's false. And that will control the display of this element right here. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So how we do that is we add the event listener to uh, yeah. So how we do that is we add the event listener to the button, just like we did before, the event binding. We give the opening round brackets, we write the name of the event, and then we give an equals inside the quotes. We give a name of a function, right? So handle toggle. Yep. Now we have to define that toggle, the handle toggle function. So we write handle toggle. Yep. So now we have a function handle toggle, and it's being called whenever this toggle button is clicked. What we have to do is we have to change show name to false if it's true and true if it's false. The easy way to do this is to write this dot show name equals not of this show name. Cool. So now we basically written a function that changes the value of show name to false or true, depending on its value. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So here we have a function which changes the value of the show name variable. And what happens is we can click on the toggle button now, and that will change the value of the show name. So now, whenever that value changes, we will conditionally render the name based on this condition. So what should happen is if I click on this toggle button, my name should disappear. So now I click on it, my name disappears. Again, I click on it, my name appears again. So this is how ng if works. We just change the value of show name, and the h1 tag was rendered on the basis of this condition right here. Okay. Now, the next directive that we're going to learn about is the ng model directive. Okay. So this new um, uh, directive that we're going to talk about is not a normal directive or not a primitive directive to Angular core. So we have to import one more module in this application to use the ng model directive. Okay. So what we have to do is we have to go to the app.module.ts, and inside this, so we've not talked about this file much. Okay. We'll do that now. So the app.module.ts is where we define the packages or the modules that we need inside our application. Also where we define all the components that we are using in the application. So what we need to do here is we need to add an import statement right here. We have to write import, and in curly braces, we have to give the name forms module from, and then we have to write at Angular and then select forms. So at Angular slash forms. That's where we're going to install this, import this forms module from. And then on the next line after this browser module, inside the imports list, I'm going to add the forms module. Good. So now the ng model directive can be used in the template. Okay. Let me check this. Yeah. Okay, so we'll carry on. Um, okay, so now we can use the ng model directive in our application. Uh, so here, the ng model directive works with an input tag. Okay, so we have to write an input tag right here. And what ng model does is basically it sets up a two-way binding between the component and the template. So what ng model does is basically sets the value of the input tag as well as look for changes in the value when the user actually updates the input tag. When the user types in the input tag, it looks for those changes, and it also fires an event back to the component. So the component also updates a variable inside it. So how it works is basically here we're going to write inside square brackets and a set of round brackets. I'm going to write the word ng model, and then we're going to give an equals, and inside the quotes, I'm going to give a name to the variable. Uh, this name of the variable can be anything. I'm just going to give it input text. Right now, we have not defined this variable in the component, so we're going to do that. We're going to put that variable right here. We're going to name it input text equals empty string. Let's say just put in the side. Yeah. So on the preview, as you can see, we have an input tag right here, and we can type things in it. Uh, so now that we have set up the ng model, what happens is that whenever we want to change the value of the input field, we can actually change the input text variable that is there in the component appears. For example, we can write hello here, and if we save, the hello also appears in the input tag. Also, if I remove this from here, if I change anything on the template side, so if I start typing in this, what happens in the under the hood is that the input text variable also changes in the component. Okay, so if I have to show that, I can do that by just writing an h1 or just a p tag, and inside that, I'm just going to show the input text so that you can see how input text changes based on the input that I write on the input field. I can just type, and now you see that the input text is being rendered in the p tag, and it is changing with my changes to the input field. This is what ng model does, and this is how we apply two-way binding in Angular. Okay, so we have learned about three kinds of binding by now. We're not going to learn about property binding in this session. So we've learned about the text interpolation right here. We've learned about that. We've learned about event binding, which is when we have to put a event listener, and then then we call a function that we define in the component. We've also looked into two-way binding, which basically creates a two-way road between the component and the template to share data. And whenever something changes on the template side, it shares the data with the component. The component also changes its data accordingly. While if something changes on the component side, the data is also transmitted to the template, so the template can update itself as well. This is what these three directives do. Now, enough with the the slides. Let's just start coding and just build an application. Okay, so I'll just go back to my folder right here, and we'll go to the terminal. Yeah. So inside the terminal, I'm going to again write the same commands ng new. I hope you remember the command for creating the application. Um, so, so we can create an Angular application with this command, as you remember, and we're just gonna name it to do app because we're gonna make a to-do list application. Okay? So now it's again gonna ask me for the routing. I'm gonna say no, and I'm gonna say yes to CSS. I'm just gonna wait for the npm packages to install. Yeah. So our packages have been installed, and let's just commit the changes. Yes, now our project has been created. We can open the project and we can see all the files here. We're familiar with this step. Uh, we're just going to shift, right click, go to open with code, and now we're good to go with creating the to-do application. I'm just going to close this window right here. I'm going to put this window up here. Okay. So at this moment, this should close. Yeah. Okay. So this is the new application that I right now created. I'm going to go into the app folder. I'm going to delete the spec.ts file from here because it's for testing. We don't need it. Um, okay. And inside the HTML file, we have a lot of stuff which we don't need. So we're just going to delete all of that. Right. Okay. Now, once we have deleted everything from the app.component.html file, we can start our we can go uh, to the terminal and start our application. So we just write serve open again, and yep, it's building my application. It's going to serve it on the browser. Yeah, so now the application is up and running, and we can actually check that by writing h1 and again put my name here. And as you can see, the name appears right here. We're going to change the h1 tag and we're going to write to do app because it's going to be a to do application. Okay. Now we have all the tools to build a to do application already. We know all of the stuff that is required to build a to do application. We need a way to show a list of to-dos, which we already know with the ng-for directive. We need a way to mark the to-dos as done when the user clicks on it, that you know by the event binding method. And then you should have a way of taking input of a to-do and then adding that to-do to the list. That you also know because you know about the ng model directive and you know about how to change data inside a function on some event. Okay, so let's just start off with building an application right now. We just get rid of this code, and inside the component, what we're going to do is we're going to create a to-dos list. Okay, so right now, this to-dos list should be a list of string, right? You might think it should be a type to-dos string array, but we will actually not make it a string array, and we'll go a little bit ahead, a little bit in depth with TypeScript, and just make it something like an interface. Okay, I'll explain to you what interface is. Basically, what I want is that the elements of the to-do list should have two properties. Okay, so let's just make the interface here. So if I make an interface of to do, and inside that we give two properties, the content and completed. Because in a to-do list, we have two things, right? We have the name of the to-do and the state of the to-do, if the to-do has been completed or not. Okay. So that is what we store in an interface. So an interface, what it does is basically says that any data of the type to do will have two things inside. It will be like an object having two things, having two properties inside it, the content property and the completed property. The content property will have a type of string, and the completed property will be a type of boolean. So the content will be the main text of the to-do, and the completed will be the boolean, which stores the state if the to-do is completed or not. Okay. So what we're going to do is here inside the app component, we are going to create a to-dos variable. We're going to give it the type of a to-do list, and we're just going to initialize that to an empty list for now. What this does is basically says that the to-dos list is of the type to-do array, which means every element inside this array should be of the type to-do, which should have two things, the content, which is of type string, and completed, which is of type boolean. Okay, cool. For now, I'll just put some content inside this to-do. So I'm just gonna create an object and give it a content of first to-do. And we have to give it a completed property and set that to false. Okay, so now our to-dos list has only one element with a content and a state that is completed or not. Okay, so now because it's a list, we have to find a way to show that list. Okay, so we already know how to do that. We do that with ng for directory. Okay, but in this case, we need to render a couple of components together, because what I'm thinking is I'll make a div, and inside that I'm going to put, first of all, the p tag, which is basically going to be the to do, and I want a button as well. Increase the, yeah. So inside that, I want a button as well, which says remove. So what happens is that we want the to-dos to have the text and also a button which says remove. When we click on this button, this should remove the to-do from the list. It is different from checking the to-dos as done, because if we check the to-do, what should happen is it should strike off this to-do. So there should be a line going through this text. But if you want to absolutely remove it from the list and not show it on the to-do list, we'll click on this button and that should remove this entire row. Okay. Now, because we don't have a styling to it, it kind of looks, it does not look like a to-do list. Okay. So what we'll do is we'll just give this div a class, just like we did before. We just give this div a class, calling it a to-do item. And inside the component.cs, CSS, I'm going to style this class. I'm going to give dot and then the class name just to do item. And inside the curly braces, I'm going to give some styles to it. So you can just follow along. You don't have to know exactly what I'm doing. But it's basically display flex will put them side by side, align items, center will center both of these things, justify, give this a width of 300 pixels, not 300, let's give it 200. Yeah, 200 pixels. And let's give this a justify uh, content of space. Save that. And now we have an item with a to do and a button remove. Okay. Cool. So now we have styled this component, this div component, but at this moment it just shows one line because we've not used the ng for directive to iterate over the to-dos list. So to use the ng for directive, we have to use it for the entire div. So we write it inside the div tag. We give star ng for, and inside the quotes, we're going to write let to do of to do's. Okay. We'll also give a semicolon and we'll write something here. Let's write let I equals index. Well, so what it does is basically takes the to do, each to do out of the to do's list, and it creates a variable called to do. But uh, it also creates another variable called I, which takes the index of each of these to dos and stores it. So for every iteration of this component of this ng4, we'll have the index value of the element also inside the I tag. So if you want to show that, we can actually do that here. We can just write a p tag, and inside that, using the text interpolation, we can just write I inside it. And as you can see, we have a number 0 and we have the text to do because here we did not use the text interpolation. Let's just change that. Um, we'll use text interpolation, we'll write to do, and now we'll have, okay, so here's the thing. We already said that the to do, each element of the to do's list is going to be an object, okay? And that object will have two things, the content and a completed state status, okay? So right now what I'm doing is I'm just showing the value of the to-do, which is not really correct because we want to show the content of this to-do. So you're going to write to-do.content, and that's going to show us our to-do item, the first to-do, because that's what's here. Yeah, so that's what we have written in this list. So it appears here. Okay. Similarly, if we copy this and we duplicate this again, second, now it also creates another row of this because we use the ng for directive. And as you can see, the I value is starting from 0 because, of course, the array indexing starts from 0. And it writes 0, 1, and it will go on like this. Okay. So cool. Now we have a way to show our to-do items. And now we need two functionalities. One is if we click on these to-dos, it should strike off the to-do. Okay, so that basically says that you've basically done, or you're basically done with the to-do. Okay, uh, how do we do that? Well, so the first thing that I want to show is that how we put a strike through a text. We just give all of these text. So the content, so this middle part, this part, will give it a class of complete, and we're going to style that complete class to be a to give a line through. So just a minute, I just write it off. So as you can see, because we have put this complete over here, uh, because we have put the class complete and we have styled that in the CSS file, both these text is getting a line through them. And this is how you give a style to, uh, a paragraph. This is how you put a line through a paragraph. Now, what we want is that it should only happen, this complete class should only be added to this to-do if the to-do dot completed status is true. How we do that is again we use text interpolation. But this time, rather than putting it inside the tag, we're going to put it inside the string for the class. So inside this, we're going to give exactly like we did it here, we're going to give a double curly braces. Inside that, we're going to give uh, round brackets. And here I'm going to write some code out. I'm going to explain that in a minute. So I'm going to give the class complete. Okay. So let's just understand this piece of code that I just wrote. Okay. So if you have any idea about ternary operations, and if you have done any other language, if you've used any other language, and if you've seen ternary operations, you'll know that this part of the code basically means that whenever the to-do dot completed property is true, it is going to set the text complete. And when we have these two curly brackets, whatever this inside part, whatever this code, this piece of code inside the two curly brackets returns, this two curly brackets will basically interpolate that text into this field. So here we are returning complete if the completed status is true, and that will basically put a class of complete on this p tag. Otherwise, we're just giving an empty string, so it will not put any class on the p tag. Now, this is a very good way to actually add conditional styling to our application. So what happens is that now, because we don't have the completed status set to true in any of these to-dos, they're not striked off. But at this moment, if I change this to-do to have a completed status of true, you can see that it has a line through styling because it gets the class of complete on it because of this trick that we used right here. Cool. So now we have a way of showing if the to-do is actually done. But we need uh, a way to toggle this. So we need to be able to click this and this should go away or it should appear. Okay. How we do that is again by using event binding. So we just put an event binding on the p tag. How we put event binding is again we put round brackets, we write click the event, and then inside the quotes, we're going to write the function that we're going to want to call. So handle, or we're going to say mark complete. But in this case, we also have to pass which to do you want to mark complete. So we have to pass the index of that to do, and then that's why we're passing the I value to the function. This function is not defined yet, so we're going to define this function here, mark complete. Let's just say that this mark complete is going to take a number from the template. And then what it does is it basically changes the completed status to false if it was already true, or true if it was already false. So what we do is we've already done this. We'll write this dot to do's, then we'll take the ith value, ith element from the to do's, and we'll set the completed status to not of the same thing, which basically means that If it was true, it's going to be set false. And if it was false, it is going to be set true. So now, if we click on any of these to do, it should stop having a line through, or it should get a line through if it did not happen. So if I click on first to do, the line through goes away. Again, if I click on it, line through appears again. So this basically gives us that functionality of marking a to do complete. Now we have to have a way of removing this to do. So we have to be able to click this to do, click this remove button, and this to do should go away. Okay. Again, because we are waiting for an event, we're listening for an event, we're going to put an event listener on the button, just like we did before. We're going to put the click handler, and inside the quotes, we're going to put a name of a function. So I'm going to name it handle remove. And this time also, we have to send it the value of I because it has to know which element to remove from the list. Right now, it's showing me an error because we've not created that function. So let's just create it. Handle remove. We're taking a number again. And now this time what we'll do is we'll basically use a method called splice. And we'll give two elements. We'll give the I variable and we'll give 1. This basically means we want to delete one element from the ith position. So that means that the ith element will be removed from the list. So now when I click on the remove button on the first to do, it should remove the first to do. As I click on it, it removes the first to do, and now the second to do becomes the 0th element in the array. Quite cool. Okay. So now we are done with we are done with marking a to do complete and removing a to do from the list. We have only one thing left, which is adding a to do to this list. So for that, we have to have an input field. So we'll create an input field here up here. We're going to create an input field and we're going to create a button called add. So what should happen is that whenever we type in this and we click on the add button, it should add a to do to this list. Okay. So for this, we of course have to use the ng model directive. And for that, we know we have to go to the module.ts, import the forms module, and put it inside the list for the imports in the module. Okay. So we write forms module, save that. We'll go to the app.ts file and app.html file, and we'll give the ng model directive inside the input type. So we just write ng model, we set an equal to, inside the quotes, we're going to give a name of a variable. That name can be anything. I'm just giving to do input. Now, inside the app.component.ts, we have to define this to do input variable as well. So we're going to write to do input is equal to an empty string. So in the beginning, what will happen is basically it's going to have the to do input variable is going to have an input string. So the input field will have nothing in it. But as we type, the to do input variable will also update in real time. And when we click add, what we want is to push this value into the array. So we'll create an event listener for that as well. Again, it's an event, it's a click event. So we'll write click over here, we write equals, and inside the quotes, we're going to write handle add. Okay. Inside the TS file, just like before, we're going to define this handle add function. And inside the handle add function, what we want to do is we want to push whatever's inside this to do input in the form of a to do object into this to-dos list, right? So first of all, let's create that object. Let's write const obj equals an object which has a content set to whatever the to-do input has. Okay, so write this dot to-do input, and we'll have another thing as well. We'll have something called the completed uh, uh, completed property set to false, because of course when you add a to-do, it's not done yet, and we're going to give the type of this object as a to-do. Cool. Now you have an object that you need to add to the to-dos list. What we do is we write this dot to-dos dot push, and inside the braces we give the object that we want to add. Cool. Now this will add an object whenever the add button is clicked uh, on the page, right? So right now, if I just write third to do and click add, it should add a third to do in the list, right? So let's just click on it. And yes, it does. It adds a third to do on the list. And right now you can also click on that to do and mark it as complete, or you can remove it. You can remove all the to dos. Then you can again add second to do and add again. Okay. So that's pretty much it. But there are some problems in this. Okay. Um, the first problem is that whenever we add a to do, this input does not get cleared. So what may happen is that we might click the button 2 times and then the to do gets added 2 times and we have duplication. We don't want that. So what we need to do is after we have put in that to do in the handle add function, we have to clear the to do input to an empty string again. So we just set that to an empty string, and because it's a two-way binding, as soon as we set the to do input to an empty string, the input field will also get cleared. We write third to do, click on add. As you can see, we added the third to do and we cleared the input field as well. But here's another problem. If you have an empty input field and you still click add, it still adds an element. To get rid of this problem, what we need to do is we need to check if the to-do input actually has some data, and then only apply execute these commands. So what we'll do is we'll write if inside the brackets, I'll write this dot to do input um, equals an empty string, then we return. Now, what this line basically means is that whenever it comes into this function, whenever this function is called, it will check if the to do input is an empty string, and it will uh, if it is an empty string, it will return from there and it will not execute any of these lines. But if it's not an empty string, it will execute all of these lines and it will add the to do to the list. So this basically solves all problems. Now, if you click on add, it does not add an empty to do. And once you add a third to do, just like that, click on add, it adds the third to do and clears the input. Now you can mark these to-dos as completed or remove them from the list. So that's it. That's about it. That's the entire session. I hope you guys enjoyed with all the examples and you got some interest on Angular. That's pretty much it with the session. Thank you guys for listening for so much for so long. Thank you.